glad to be here with my wife, Karen. We came this afternoon from Israel, and she was, by the way, an officer, one of the elite armor brigade in the IDF. And we have 5 wonderful kids and we live in the Golan Heights. 3 of them just completed their service. One of them served in one of the Special Forces unit. The other one, Stavi, is 17 and a half, is going to join the Israeli Navy SEALs. And the little one, which is the commander of all of us. So it's great to be here, and I want to use this opportunity and share with you my expertise about the current situation across the Middle East and the challenges that Israel is facing today. I'm sure that you heard about the American strike over Syria 3 weeks ago, the Israeli attacks over Syria, and probably you ask yourself what's going to happen with the President Trump decision on May 12, just 2 weeks in advance, about the Iranian deal and how it's going to affect the geopolitical situation across the Middle East. And if we talk about the Arab Spring, in my point of view, it's a tough winter because it creates so many challenges and unstable situation across the Middle East. And you probably sit here in Mexico City and ask yourself, why those crazy people 5,000 miles away are fighting each other? Well, the circumstances that started 7 years ago when the young generation in many countries all over the Middle East demonstrate for democratic society and open society against the dictators that control those societies for so many years, they had a hope and dream about having a democratic society. So it's a geopolitics issue, but it's also a lot of economic interest on the table. And it's also a religious struggle between Sunnis and Shias across the Middle East. Now, this conflict took place 100 years ago, but the crisis over the Middle East actually created a very tough struggle between Sunnis and Shias. Why they are fighting each other? They are fighting each other about the legacy of Muhammad. Who is going to lead the Islam today? The majority who are the Sunnis or the minority who are the Shiites? This is a critical struggle as part of the crisis across the Middle East. Now we definitely can see some phenomena which is characterized the situation across the Middle East since the Arab Spring started 7 years ago. For those that dream and have a hope that we will see a democratic society, it didn't work out. There is no other democratic society across the Middle East since Israel, which is an island of stability. Why? Because those societies all over, Tunisia, Iraq, Syria, Lebanon, all over, they get used to live under dictators for so many years, for decades. And I think we have to educate them for generation by generation to understand the benefits of being a democratic society. It's not going to work within days, months, or years. So sometimes when we talk about crisis across the Middle East, we have to prefer stability and cooperation and to not dream about things that actually are not going to happen in the end of the day, like democratic societies. Another thing that is very clear when we talk about the Arab Spring, there is a clear decline of the American influence across the Middle East since the withdrawal from Iraq in 2012. United States withdrew from all over the Middle East. Still have some deployment in Iraq and a little bit in Syria, but they have other priorities, but that's affect dramatically the situation, and that's affect dramatically the American allies, the Sunnis countries across the Middle East and Israel. On the other hand, we have a dramatic increasing of the Russia influence all over the Middle East, mainly in Syria. And actually today, Putin controls the situation in Syria. And we have also 2 major global terror organizations across the Middle East, ISIS and Al-Qaeda. And I think we could, if we want to have a decisive victory against those global terrorists, we must have a comprehensive strategy based on 4 strong legs. One is cooperation, coalition like we had in the case of the Islamic State, 65 countries. But we need a strong cooperation, share intelligence between the coalition. We need great intelligence. That's critical. And we need boots on the ground. I think we could have a decisive victory against the Islamic State. It took 3 years. I think we could do it within a few months or maybe 1 year if we had a strong boots on the ground. And the last thing is cutting-edge technology. You know that today even the terror organization, they have cyber capability, they have advanced technology, drone capability. This is the challenge that we have to face when we are fighting those terror organizations. Now, let me start and put to details about the crisis. We're going to start with the crisis in Syria, which is actually the major concern of the future for Israel. Now, that's the situation in Syria today. The majority of Syria, over 50%, is controlled by the radical axis, which is Iran, Hezbollah, Assad regime, supported by the Russians. That's the border in the Golan Heights, the 50 miles of the Golan Heights right here. And in northeast Syria, we have 30% of the Syrian territory controlled by the Kurds and American troops. And here in the north, we have Turkey military forces who actually penetrate the Syrian line and occupied all this territory. They said they are fighting ISIS, but in the end of the day, they're actually fighting the Kurds, which is the main threat for Turkey for many, many years. We can see that the Islamic State that used to be here is not exist anymore. We have 2 islands of ISIS terrorists right here in southern part of Syria and the east part of Iraq. I would say a few hundred terrorists here and here, but the Islamic State that used to be in this area actually, after 3 years of fighting the coalition, is not exist anymore. Now, when we talk about the situation in Syria, in my point of view, it's not a civil war, it's a terrible genocide. And the question is why the international community didn't do anything when they knew exactly what's going on. Why today, 75 years after the Holocaust, that millions of Jews and millions of people all over Europe and all over the world lost their life, the international community actually doesn't care about what's going on here. We have over 1 million people lost their life, over 2 million are injured, and 10 million are refugees. That's the worst case since World War II. Now, there is a lot of things that the international community could do 5, 6 years ago, and it's impossible today. For example, create no-fly zone above Syria, that Assad regime cannot use their air force to kill their people. For example, train, rearm, and fund the moderate Sunnis, not Al-Qaeda, not ISIS, the moderate Sunnis who started the struggle against Assad 7 years ago. Unfortunately, today, with the deployment of the Russia right here, many things is impossible today. Now, in 2013, we have the chemical weapon crisis when President Obama addressed the nation, that's a red line from the United States point of view. And he said, I'm going to give an order to operate a heavy airstrike over Syria. But Putin was smart enough to convince Assad, take the deal, destroy your chemical capability, and prevent an American strike over Syria. So actually, in the last 6-7 years, the international community almost didn't do anything. Now, let me tell you the interest of the major actors in this game. You probably ask yourself, why Putin has a deep involvement over Syria? Because Putin used the clear decline of the American influence, and he wants, his first priority is to become a global actor again. He's already there. He used the clear decline of the American influence, and he actually controlled the situation in Syria today. There is no question. Assad wouldn't survive until today without the unbelievable support of the Syrian Air Force in the last 3-4 years. Now, the other major actors are the Iranians. Why the Iranians have a strategic interest to be on the Israeli border right here in the Golan Heights. Because the crisis in Syria gave the Iranian regime the first time in the history. You know, Iran is located 1,000 miles away from here, but the crisis in Syria gave the Iranian regime a great opportunity to create a threat against Israel in the Golan Heights on the ground. Now, what they plan to do, they first of all fought with Assad for years. They lost 100 warriors, they spent billions of dollars, and they also gave an order to the Hezbollah to cross the border from Lebanon and fight for Assad. And they brought 25,000 Shiite militias from Afghanistan, Pakistan, and Sri Lanka to Syria to fight for Assad. Now when they are the winners of this struggle, they have a long-term strategy to build strategic infrastructure and create a real threat against Israel. What they plan to do is having Navy base, Air Force base, and build here, like in Lebanon, 50,000 missiles that can reach Tel Aviv and every Israeli strategic spots, every Israeli Air Force base. Can Israel live with this crazy threat? Definitely not. We must stop the Iranians. Now, there is a close cooperation between Russia and Iran. Here in Syria, they are fighting together, they have the same interest, they want to keep Assad, but they have also a huge economic interest on the table. Gas, oil deal, and all the nuclear facilities in Iraq supplied by the Russians many years ago. So they have a very close cooperation together. And they are the winners of this game. And the major problem from the Israeli point of view is the fact that the United States is not here. The former administration and this administration don't want to jump to this swamp. Why? Probably different priorities. North Korea case, the terrible trauma from Iraq and Afghanistan war a few years ago. There's a lot of issues on the table. But the bottom line, our best allies, the United States, is not part of the game. That's a big problem from the Israeli point of view. Now, Israel said from the beginning of the civil war that what's happened here is against our values, that we're not going to be, it's not going to be part of it's not going to be our business unless it's going to touch the Israeli vital interest. And you probably have heard that Israel had a clear three red lines strategy. We put on the table 3 red lines. The first one is do not allow the Iranians to be 20 miles from the Golan Heights. This is number one. We don't want that the Iranians will create troubles to the Israeli targets right here. The second red line is to not allow the Iranians to remove advanced technology from Syria to Lebanon to the Hezbollah infrastructure. That's why you probably have heard that Israel attacked again and again in Syria those convoys that we got an unbelievable intelligence. We attack them. When we say advanced technology, we mean long-distance missiles that can reach Tel Aviv and other Israeli strategic spots. And we mean anti-air batteries that can create some challenges to the Israeli Air Force. But the most severe threat is the fact that the Iranians want to build here advanced industry. They want to produce the long-distance missiles under the ground here in Syria. And they want to have a crazy capability, 50,000 missiles that can reach Tel Aviv. Can Israel live with this situation? Definitely not. This is all about, and lately we saw a direct conflict between Israel and the Iranians. We attacked their drone capability a few weeks ago. Why Israel is fighting today the Iranians? Because they just started the project. If we're gonna wait 3-4 years, it's gonna be too late. That's why Israel is fighting now. We take a risk that maybe we'll have an escalation, but we don't have any other choice. Israel cannot live with the threat from Iran, as I told you. And there is a beautiful Israeli humanitarian project along the Golan Heights that we take care of 5,000 casualties from the battles in Syria to the Israeli hospitals for free. This is a wonderful project, and we also give 100,000 Sunnis who live here along the border in the Golan Heights. We give them food, water, medical support, and we tried to open the schools that were closed for 6-7 years. And we had volunteers from all over the world. We have American hospital, Canadian, Australian. People come from all over the world to help Israel, to support those people that suffered so much in the last 5-6 years. So the bottom line regarding to the situation in Syria, it's a real threat for Israel, and that's why Israel took the decision to fight the Iranian threat now, because tomorrow it's going to be much more complicated. From here, I want to say a few words. Now, just one more thing about the President Trump decision on May 12. That's very important. I think that the Iranian regime are in a real pressure right now, because they know if President Trump is going to cancel the deal and put the sanction against their economy, that's going to affect dramatically their economy. That's going to affect the people who demonstrate on the street of Tehran every day. And that's maybe will change the priorities of the regime, make them much weaker, and maybe they will decide to leave the project in Syria, which is critical for Israel. So the President Trump decision is critical for the future of the region. Why it's a bad deal? That's a very good question. Why President Trump and Israel said in the last 3 years since the agreement was signed in Vienna, that's a bad deal, because the inspection is terrible. For example, the Israeli services and the American services, we know that in some military sites we have some suspicious issue. We want to check them. The Iranians said, no, it's not on the list of the deal. You cannot inspect it. So there is no real inspection on what they're doing. Number two, the ballistic missile that can reach New York City and Israel, there is no limitation. It's not part of the deal. There is no inspection of this terrible project. If they're talking about a peaceful project, why do they need ballistic missiles that can reach New York City? Now, the third point, the fact that the Iranians are the largest generator for terror infrastructure all over the Middle East is not part of the deal. What do you think they're going to do with the $100 billion that were freezing in the state for so many years? They're going to increase dramatically their budget and fund to the Hezbollah, to their supporters in Yemen, in Lebanon, all over. They're going to increase dramatically their terror infrastructure all over the globe. That's what we're going to do. So the options are canceling the deal and put the sanction, or change the deal and put a real limitation and real inspection on the Iranian project. And that's critical, and that may affect the situation here in Syria, which is critical for Israel. Now, let me say a few words about the situation in Lebanon, which is, in my point of view, it's one front, because what the Iranians try to do is to actually create a multi-front challenge for Israel. That next conflict, Israel is going to face a conflict from Gaza, Lebanon, and Syria at the same time. That's what they try to do. Now, I told you about the Sunni-Shiites conflict. The Iranians are Shiites, but sometimes when they have the same interest, they cooperate with the Sunnis. For example, the Islamic Jihad and the Hamas in Gaza are Sunnis. In spite of this fact, the Iranians cooperate, fund, and rearm those two terror organizations against Israel. So, what's the situation with the Hezbollah in Lebanon? The bottom line in Lebanon, the Iranians and the Hezbollah control Lebanon. That's the bottom line today. And we're going to have an election next week, and probably the Hezbollah will increase dramatically their political power. There's no question about it. Now, as you know, we have the Second Lebanon War that took place 12 years ago, which actually was not very successful from the Israeli point of view. I must be honest with you. We had a lot of failures of readiness of the Israeli home front. We had a lot of failures in the battlefield. So the bottom line, we did not achieve a decisive victory. And we compromised on a terrible diplomatic deal, what we call the UN Resolution 1701. But the question is, why in the last 12 years it's so quiet along the Lebanese border? Why the Hezbollah didn't try to escalate the situation against Israel? First of all, in spite of the fact that Israel was not ready to this war, the Hezbollah suffered a lot of damage. They lost 700 terrorists, over 1,000 were injured. Those are real numbers for a small guerrilla organization. In that time, 12 years ago, they used to have 7,000 terrorists. Today they have over 40,000. The second reason, the young generation, even in the Shiite community in southern Lebanon, disagree with the Hezbollah policy. Lately we saw the religion leaders in the Shiite communities in Lebanon disagree with the Hezbollah policy because they claim, the Hezbollah leaders, you take Lebanese guys across the border to Syria to fight for foreign countries, for the Iranians, for Assad. That's unacceptable. Why we have to sacrifice our sons from Lebanon for the Iranians and for Assad? That's unacceptable. And we saw a lot of demonstration in Lebanon leading by Saudi's money against the Hezbollah policy. And the third point why it's so quiet, since the war had ended, the Hezbollah changed their strategy. Instead of sitting on the border, they stepped back a few miles. And by purpose, they build their bunkers, tunnels, and missile sites under hospitals, under civilians, under schools, because they know when the pictures of the civilian death come to the people in New York City, Paris, London, they get the list. And the other thing that, we have a multinational forces deployed in the region. For example, we have along the Lebanese border on the eastern section, Spanish brigade deployed. They're wonderful guys. They enjoy the Israeli sun. They got a wonderful payment. But that's not the point. Do they stop the rearming process from Iran? Unfortunately not. And here are the numbers. Instead of having 30,000 missiles 12 years ago, the Hezbollah today have 130,000 missiles ready to be launched to Israel. That's a terrible threat. We estimate, by the way, that in any conflict in the future, the Hezbollah is going to launch at least 1,500 missiles every day to Israel. That's a real threat. Now, that's true that we have 10 Iron Dome batteries. We're going to double the numbers next year. And we have the multi-tire system that can block many of those missiles. But we cannot block all of them. And that's going to be, the key question, how long is it going to take the Israeli Air Force to destroy those missile sites that we know exactly where they are located? I would assume it's going to take like a week. That's going to be a very tough week for Tel Aviv area and for the Israeli home front until the Israeli pilots will destroy the majority of those sites all over Israel. But the most important thing is quiet because the Israeli deterrence is very effective. The Hezbollah leaders, they know if they're going to restart attacking Israeli targets, the Israeli response is going to be crazy. Now, how the civil war in Syria, the crisis in Syria affect the situation in Lebanon? The Hezbollah, as I told you, sent 10,000 terrorists to fight for Assad in Syria, not against Israel. Now, in those battles, they got a lot of experience, but they lost 2,000 deaths and over 6,000 were injured. That's a crazy number. And that's created a lot of demonstration inside Lebanon. But that's cost a lot of money. Think about it, to pay 8,000 families every month, that's a lot of money for the Hezbollah. And that's created a lot of demonstration even in the Shiite communities. And the other big issue on the table, I told you that this crazy war in Syria, we have 10 million people are refugees, 2 in Jordan, 3 in Turkey, 2 in Syria itself, over 1 million in Germany, and 2 million crossed the border from Syria to Lebanon. Now, what's the total number of the Lebanese population? 4 million. Now they got another 2 million Sunnis. You can imagine how it's going to affect the structure of Lebanese society, how it's going to affect the relationship between the communities. That's why the Iranians and the Hezbollah are so nervous about it. Now, with those two tough challenges, fighting in Syria with so many casualties, and the refugees issue, do they have any interest to open a new front with Israel? Definitely not. That's why they keep the Israeli borders so quiet for so many years. Okay? Now, let me say a few words about the situation in Gaza, which is actually, I told you that the Iranians are involved there with the Hamas and the Jihad Islamic. First of all, when we talk about the situation in Gaza 4 years after the Protective Age operation that took place in 2014, we have an effective Israeli deterrence. The Hamas actually almost didn't try to do anything. The Islamic Jihad, who found and supported by the Iranians, actually tried to escalate the situation in the last few years. There are two performances that characterize the situation in Gaza. One, Israel is building a huge obstacle along Gaza Strip. It costs billions of dollars because we want to prevent from them to continue to dig the tunnels, and we put it as a national project. We have a secret technology that can indicate exactly where are the tunnels. And you probably have heard that in the last couple of months we destroyed every month another tunnel, and that's a strategic weapon that the Hamas spent billions of dollars to build it. It's going to end in the end of the year. So they cannot launch rockets to Israel, missiles to Israel, because we have the Iron Dome. Now they cannot dig the tunnels that can arrive to the Israeli communities. And they were thinking if they're going to escalate the situation with the Israeli project to build the obstacle and destroy those tunnels. They decided that they're not going to escalate the situation. But on the other hand, we have a very tough humanitarian crisis over Gaza. You know why? Because all the money that the international community sent to Gaza to have a better life for the 2 million people that live in Gaza, the Hamas take this budget and dig more tunnels and rearm themselves instead of rebuild Gaza and give the people of Gaza better life. Even the reconciliation agreement that we saw lately between the Palestinian Authority and the Hamas didn't work out because the Hamas really don't want to cooperate with the Palestinian Authority. They don't want to be under the command of President Abbas. They want to keep their military capability, and in the end of the day, their strategic interest is to take the West Bank in the next election and actually control the West Bank and Gaza together. That's going to be a real threat for the stability of those regions. So the bottom line, we face some escalation with the March of Retrain lately, all the demonstrations on the fence of Gaza. It's going to be very tough next 2 weeks when we're going to open the new American embassy in Jerusalem. We're going to face a lot of demonstration along the Gaza Strip and the West Bank, because Jerusalem is a big issue in the West Bank also. So we're going to have a very tough situation in Israel next 2 weeks. With the crisis, think about it, with the situation in the Golan Heights with the Iranians, that's going to be very tough. Okay. We'll see a short movie about the Israeli 70s, the great achievement that we had, and then I would love to take your questions about the challenges that I talk about all over Syria, Lebanon, and Gaza. And the nuclear deal also, please. The history of my country for 70 years is the 2 Israeli F-15 flying above Auschwitz and send a clear message to everybody across the globe, never again. The reason that 75 years ago, 6 million Jews were killed in the terrible genocide in Europe, and we see today, 70 years later, the unbelievable capability of the IDF, Israeli Air Force, send a message to everybody, every Jew all over the world, that it's not going to happen again. Israel will take care and be the backing of everybody across the global, for every Jew, everywhere in the globe. And if we talk about what's the challenges ahead, I think that the Iranian threat in Syria and the Iranian nuclear threat are the toughest, the most significant challenges that Israel is facing today.